Welcome, young Skywalker. Who are you? I didn't invite this thing here. Who is this? This must be some kind of joke.
The front office just handed me him and sent me here.
What do you think we're doing here today, Beta? I wanted Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker, does that look anything like your son to you? Get with the program, man.
I am sorry, my master.
Well, now this is awkward.
Not
helping.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Donald Binks, and today we are going to be pitting the entire Covenant Empire versus the entire Galactic Empire. So, without wasting your time, I'm going to quickly introduce the scenario that we're talking about, and then, I'm not gonna lie, we're gonna be getting into some pretty boring numbers, so if you are not a numbers person, you may want to look at the timestamps and skip them, and then go straight to the scenario. But I must warn you, the numbers are very important. Okay, so, to set up the scenario, I think it's the most plausible way for the Covenant to come into contact with the Star Wars galaxy is through a Forerunner portal, much like the one we found on Earth that leads to the Ark. Sorry if you hear anything in the background. My cat is clawing under the door. She wants in here. So this isn't completely unreasonable, by the way. After the Forerunners activated the Halos to wipe out the Flood, the remaining survivors were so horrified by their crimes against sentience that they left the Milky Way galaxy. The builders may have created a way back to the Milky Way after they exiled themselves to the Star Wars galaxy. I know it sounds crazy, but I gotta get this scenario rolling somehow. So you fast forward 100,000 years after the Forerunners left the galaxy, and the Covenant is raising the planet Reach. The Pillar of Autumn was destroyed, along with Master Chief. I know, so sad. Noble Six and Master Chief are not in a cave, or are they? Despite this, the Covenant would still learn the location of all the Halos, as well as the Ark and Earth from the luminary that was found by the Prophet of Regret on Meridian, which was seen in the Halo 2 Anniversary Terminal 14. So this is where we're going to diverge from Halo canon, other than the Foreigners making a portal to the Star Wars galaxy. Now, instead of just the locations of the rings and the other Forerunner structures, the Luminary is also going to detail the location of a second portal, leading to the Star Wars galaxy that was left behind by the exiled Forerunners. Again, I know this sounds ridiculous, but just bear with me, we're getting to the giant galaxy-spanning war soon. So thanks to the events of Halo 1 never happening, the Great Schism would never occur, and Earth would be destroyed. The UNSC would declare Operation Sunspear a go and launch out the UNSC Infinity. The UNSC Navy would become nomadic, and they would start Nova bombing any Covenant planets that they could find. The Covenant, before being able to activate the Halos to usher in the Great Journey, send multiple expeditionary forces into the portal to explore this new galaxy. So here it is. All the pieces are set. The prophets have humanity by the balls, and they're about to activate the Halos on the Ark. But, upon exploring the portal, which leads to the Star Wars galaxy, the Covenant discovers, lo and behold, a colony of humans. And as per usual, the colony is burned to the ground, razed, along with the surrounding settlements. The Covenant would have this news spread far and wide that the demons, or humanity, have been found in another freaking galaxy. To the entirety of the Covenant, they don't give a damn. But as the Covenant is throwing a little party for the imminent Great Journey, the Prophet of Truth is shitting bricks. The music stops because it smells like poo, and the Prophet runs to the back of the room. You see, as detailed in the newer Halo book Divine Wind, in general, the Sanshayim, aka the Prophet species, or at least their leadership, knew what the true purpose of the Halos were and what they were capable of. You see, the original plan was for the Sanshayim to take cover in a shield world called Cloister, so that after the galaxy was purged from firing the Halos, they could emerge on a barren galaxy that they could remake with the help of the Forerunner genetic repositories. Belief in the Great Journey was not uniform, and the Prophet of Truth knew what was going to happen when he activated the Halos. You don't believe me? Okay, well fine. Look at this video, Appa.
What's the matter, big shot? Can't start your own party?
I admit, I need your help. That secret dies with all the rest.
So you may be thinking, but why does that matter? Everyone else will be dead. Yeah, but only in the Milky Way galaxy. The Star Wars galaxy has no freaking halos. So now, humanity, who are originally the inheritors of all that the Foreigners left behind, are leading a massive, imperialistic, ever-expanding galactic empire who surely would be interested in any Foreigner technology that they could weaponize. And now, they have access to the Milky Way's newly opened front door. So, despite the Prophet's immediate attempts, First Contact has already been accidentally established by destroying an outer rim planet in the Empire's territory. Also, I just gotta note, despite the Covenant's best efforts, I'm gonna say the portal can't be closed. So, yeah. Okay, and to add even more history to dump upon you, this is bad because the Prophets discovered a long time ago from Mendicant Bias, who was aboard the Dreadnought in the Covenant capital High Charity, that humanity were the reclaimers to the Foreigners. Or in other words, the Foreigners left everything behind to the humans. So, the Prophets, up until this point, had been mistranslating reclaimer for reclamation. So not only have the Prophets been mistranslating something for millennia at this point, not just them, their ancestors, but they've also realized from that should the public learn that humanity was to inherit all the Foreigners left behind, their entire religion, the Great Journey, and their salvation would be exposed as a lie. So the Prophets, in fear of losing their power, they sprung up an even bigger lie that the humans were just an insult to the Foreigners, and they launched a crusade to wipe them out. They needed to preserve the faith, so they launched a war that they were initially unprepared for, but gradually ramped up. The elites constantly questioned the Prophets, why were we wasting our ships and troops to kill these primitive aliens? But the Prophets just kept on insisting, take no prisoners, and there are no survivors allowed. 2 golden rules. So, while the Covenant could activate the Halos with a secret human prisoner, the Prophets would risk that this undiscovered collection of humanity in the Star Wars galaxy could ruin the Prophets' plans to remake the galaxy in their image. So, without wasting your time, I'll be diving right into the quick synopsis of both of the factions, and I'll go painfully into nerdy details about both of the factions' military capabilities, right down to the logistics of a grunt's food nipple supply. Timestamps are in the description if you want to skip straight into the scenario. Hint, hint, if your attention span is less than that of a rock, you should skip this part of the video because we are going to go into very detailed, boring numbers. Thank you very much and goodbye. The Covenant, also referred to as the Covenant Empire, is a massive religious hegemony of multiple alien species that control a large portion of the Orion Arm in the Milky Way galaxy. Without going too in-depth in the mountain of history about how the Covenant was formed, all that's important to know here is that the Covenant was formed and united in the worship of the mystified Forerunners in the Halo Arrays, which they believed, if activated, would bring them to their alien version of heaven. Spoiler alert, reaching heaven, also known as the Great Journey, would nuke the entire galaxy and kill everyone. Bummer. Every citizen within the Covenant was given employment and was driven by service for salvation as a motivation to work. So think of it as a massive space Catholic church. Despite this, there was still discrimination within the Covenant's ranks, which led to lesser species being treated as second-class citizens with little political power and representation. This led to poor proletariats like Flip, unionizing against the Covenant before being promptly bitch-slapped by the Covenant hierarchy and proceeding to barbecue the entire grunt homeworld and their supply of food nipple. Okay, so Covenant technology is more accurately described as more imitative than innovative. as most of it has been reverse engineered from the leftover artifacts made by the Forerunners, who were wiped out when the Halo arrays were activated to wipe out the Flood. Don't worry, we're going to get back to that later. The important tech, which is relevant to this matchup, is mainly the Covenant's reverse-engineered slip space navigation, which, though slower than hyperspace travel in Star Wars, it has excellent combat capabilities if it's utilized correctly. Along with this, they have near instantaneous interstellar communication, they have gravity and repulsor technology, and they're able to manipulate high volumes of plasma from sublight travel. So while we're on the topic of tech, the Covenant, they have religious taboos of using any AI, due to their knowledge of how the AI once betrayed the Forerunners. I'm looking at you, Mendigan Bias, but in the most roundabout way possible, the Covenant got lucky as hell, and they subjugated the Huragak, or the engineers, into being their living computers for them. But as far for the species which weren't utilized as living calculators, the Covenant population I estimate numbered in the tens of billions, specifically around the ball range of about 60 billion. So various sources have led me to this number, but instead of boring you by reading the entire list, I'm just going to put my findings on the screen. So, the Covenant military is a vast and complex organization composed of multiple species and factions, making it difficult to pin down their exact population numbers. However, the estimate suggests that at its peak during the Human Covenant War, the Covenant military might have included millions of personnel and thousands of ships. As for the amount of military personnel, I'd say the Covenant mobilized millions of soldiers out of that population. So if we assume that 1% of the Covenant was enlisted in the military, as is normal for many militaries on Earth, the Covenant would have around 600 million military personnel, including soldiers, support, and admins. So out of the 60 billion population, 600 million were military personnel. So also, the Covenant's fleet, we know, comprised of 1,200 warships, which defended High Charity, aka the mobile Covenant capital, and a fleet of 20 CSO-class megacarriers. Those things are huge, by the way, bigger than New York City, which has a supporting fleet of around 200 warships each. So, this leads to the general community consensus being that the Covenant's total navy size was around 5,320 warships. So, while we don't have the exact numbers of how many ship types there were, and it doesn't exactly matter in this scenario, I'm just going to stand with the Covenant having a balanced fleet in descending order. So, I would say they'd have about 20 CSO class mega carriers, 200 CAS carriers, 600 ORS heavy cruisers, 1,000 CPV destroyers, 1,450 CCS cruisers, and 1,600 miscellaneous craft, including STV heavy corvettes. A lot of you probably have no idea what the hell I just said. That's fine. Each of the CCS cruisers housed about 50 Banshees, 32 Seraphs, and 10 Phantoms. And the CCS cruiser was one of the Covenant's main multi-role battleships. Much of the stuff here I'm going to count as already being included into the enlisted military, so I'm only going to look at the space count. I'm just going to use the CCS cruiser as a baseline to create a total vehicle count. So if we do that, I'm going to average that the Covenant has around a total of 266,000 Banshees, 170,240 Seraphs, 53,200 Phantoms. You know, despite this, the Covenant, as you are about to find out, they're so severely outnumbered that the Prophets, they might as well just great journey their hover chair asses out of this matchup. Okay, so next to the Galactic Empire, which really needs no introduction, the Galactic Empire, at the start of the Empire Strikes Back, despite the losses of the first Death Star, was really big. I mean, maybe the Imperial military was just Palpatine compensating for something else, but you didn't hear that from me. According to the Star Wars Essential Atlas, the Empire population was approximately, you ready for this, 100 quadrillion members. Wow. With around 1.75 million planets under the Empire's control, and another 69 million other colonies. Nice. At its peak, the Imperial Navy fielded millions of warships, including an estimated 25,000 Star Destroyers, fulfilling the Emperor's will throughout the galaxy. So the Emperor's central warship cadre is so well structured and uniformed, but the Imperial Navy suffers against strike craft, largely due to the inadequacies of its own starfighters and point defense systems. As you know, the TIE fighters are notoriously just a fucking jet engine strapped with two little rudders. Like, they're fast, but they're very, very fragile. The Empire's focus mainly was on size, firepower, and the terror that came at the expense of a well-balanced fleet. So anyways, the Imperial Army, which is the main ground force of the Galactic Empire, a lot of people don't know they had an army. It operates this massive amount of ground combat vehicles, and it maintains garrisons across the galaxy. So it also cooperates with other branches of the Empire and like a variety of operations. The Imperial Army consists of a considerable amount of legions, enough to project power throughout the entire galaxy. Remember that, was it 100 quadrillion members? Holy shit, dude, that's a big army they have to have. So some of the legions are stationed on the capital planet Coruscant, of course, as part of the Emperor's personal security, while others are scattered in the Imperial Navy and the planetary garrisons across the galaxy. Imperial Army officers and crew typically wear the Imperial Standard green uniforms when they're not clad in armor. So, in A New Hope, Grand Moff Tarkin explains the Empire's military doctrine of peacekeeping, internal security, and counterinsurgency. He describes it as this type of state terrorism philosophy, which was a rule of fear of force rather than force itself. So the instrument of this power is the military, which includes the Imperial Stormtroopers, a massive fleet of the 25,000 Star Destroyers, and the Death Star 2, the moon-sized superweapon capable of destroying entire planets. So if we're going to clump everything together, what does the Empire have? What do you bring to the table? The Empire would say, well, we have millions of vessels alongside of our 25,000 Star Destroyers. We have a huge number of Stormtroopers and the largest military force in the galaxy. And we have tons of super weapons, most notably both the Death Stars. We got the Galaxy Gun, we got the Eclipse, we got the 50 Super Star Destroyers, and the Sun Crusher. The Empire's military portfolio is insane. Since every Star Destroyer has a crew of 40,000, the Imperial Navy would hypothetically have 1 trillion, yes, 1 trillion members. And on top of this, the Imperial Navy isn't only comprised of Star Destroyers. As I said earlier, you have space stations set throughout the galaxy. You got the Death Star 2. You got the rest of the ships not mentioned besides the Star Destroyers. So I'm going to estimate that the Imperial Navy's total member count, including, soldiers, medical personnel, admin, and whatever else you could add up, is about 2 trillion. So, moving on from the Navy, the Imperial Army's largest element was the Sector Army, which numbered about 1.5 million fighting men per sector. So you multiply that with the galaxy's 1,024 sectors, and you get, let me make sure I read this right, hundreds, millions, billions, not as much as the Navy, 1,536,000,000 combat troops in the galaxy. Then we got logistics, such as the medical services, the technicians, the engineers, the droid repairsmen, the comms scan men, and whatever else you could dream up. If we're going to be generous and say that for every trooper there are 3 support personnel, we get over 4.6 billion beings. Not as big as the Navy, but I suppose the Navy is more important when you're controlling an entire galaxy in space. Then we have the administrative personnel, who handle the payroll, the databanks, the pensions, the service records, the shipping info, the inventory, and all that like. So let's do the same number again. And as well, the Empire loved bureaucracy. I'm just going to do another low estimate. So you get about 4.6 billion beings for freaking admin. So, without counting the Stormtroopers, the Comp Force, the Special Forces, the Spec Ops, the Auxiliaries, the Experimental Units, the Special Contingents, the Military Police, we get the following number for the total size of the Imperial Army, which was 10,752,000,000 support and admin. And I believe I lowballed the number of support and administrative personnel. Then we have the Comp Force units attached to the Army, and that's about every fifth of every Army unit is a Comp Forceman. So if we add them together, we get another 307,000 troops. So, in summary, the Imperial Navy vastly outnumbers the Imperial Army, which makes sense. You got 1 trillion people in the Navy, you got about 11 billion in the Army. Okay, so with the numbers and the Covenant's hopes and dreams out of the way, let's take a look into a couple scenarios that could play out. So, unlike the Halo timeline, the eradication of humanity was a secondary objective before beginning the Great Journey. But with the literal inheritors to the Foreigners being able to survive the activation of the Halos in the Star Wars galaxy, the Prophets would change their priorities to cleanse humanity from the Milky Way and the Star Wars galaxy first. And while the humans in the Star Wars galaxy may technically be a different, unconnected species of human from Milky Way, the Covenant would have no way to know that. In fact, they probably would think they're the same ones because they all speak fucking English. Okay, so with the last planets of the UNSC being eradicated, the Covenant would continue their crusade into the Star Wars galaxy as ordered by the Prophets. The Prophets would find a way to spin the narrative that until every human has been destroyed, the Great Journey could not commence. And so, with reckless aggression, the Covenant would start eradicating worlds in the outer rim of the Star Wars galaxy, starting nearest towards the portal. So initially, the resistance would be very weak, and the Empire probably wouldn't notice until days or even weeks after planets had been glassed. And the Covenant would realize at this point that this sect of humanity was not associated with the UNSC. In fact, many of the humans cohabitated planets with undiscovered species. Initially, the Covenant would glass planets indiscriminately until they scavenged wreckages and they would learn the Star Wars language of Galactic Basic, as they did with human ships during the Human Covenant War. Again, they speak English, but I guess we'll just overlook that. Weeks after the first planets had been glassed, the Imperial government had been notified of multiple planets that they had lost contact with. Much of the Imperial footage would show molten plasma raining from the skies of planets and strange, unknown aliens massacring the local garrisons and populations. A small patrol of 5 Star Destroyers and supporting vessels would be sent to investigate. Upon their arrival, the planet below was glassed beyond recognition. The possibility of this being a rogue pirate fleet bombarding the planet was out of the question. The evidence gathered by the ISB, which was the Star Wars equivalent of the American CIA, points towards an organized military attack, attacking the Empire's colonies. While raids were common on the Outer Rim, something of this scale was extremely rare. Stations in this sector on abroad were put upon high alert. A station orbiting a colony nearby alerts the patrol fleet of another hostile raid being launched upon the planet. The Star Destroyers set course and jump into hyperspace towards the colony. In front of them, 10,000 kilometers away, are 5 CCS battle cruisers equipped with 1 excavation beam, 1 igneous plasma lance, 16 plasma torpedo silos, 42 plasma cannons, and 50 pulse lasers each. Each battlecruiser had a complement of 50 Banshees, 32 Seraphs, 10 Phantoms, 20 boarding craft, 180 elite majors, 2,500 warriors of various species, and 4,100 thralls of various species on board. Aboard each of these 5 Star Destroyers were 60 heavy turbo laser batteries, 60 ion cannons, 6 heavy dual turbo laser turrets, 2 heavy ion cannon turrets, 2 quad heavy turbo lasers, 3 triple medium turbo lasers, 2 medium turbo lasers, and 10 tractor beam cannons. Each Star Destroyer had a complement of 48 TIE fighters, 12 TIE bombers, and 12 TIE interceptors, along with a crew of 9,235 officers and 27,850 enlisted personnel and 9,700 stormtroopers aboard each Star Destroyer. So, according to Halo The Fall of Reach, page 320, the Covenant battleships have a firing range of up to 100,000 kilometers, and according to the new Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology, the Star Destroyer's maximum weapon range is a measly 80 kilometers. Plasma away, the Covenant shipmaster orders. The CCS battlecruiser would unleash 5 plasma torpedoes, each followed by a shot from its plasma lance. at long range to disrupt the Star Destroyer's shields. Too many plasma torpedoes launched at once would strain the ship's energy supplies and leave the CCS cruisers vulnerable. A swarm of 160 Seraphs exit the CCS battle fleet with a screen of 250 Banshees. The Star Destroyers, which are out of firing range, to retaliate immediately, push ahead, and they divert all power from the particle shields to the ray shields and set the deflector screens to the double front. Basically, they put all the shields in the front of the Star Destroyer. The Star Destroyers absorb multiple volleys of torpedoes and strikes from the plasma lances. The shields hold, but they will struggle to hold against future salvos. The shipmaster of the Covenant fleet would quickly realize that the Star Destroyers have yet to open fire, and they are full speed ahead. At this moment, whichever ship has faster acceleration will decide who wins this battle. So the Covenant simply outrange the Star Destroyers and have their fleet line enter full reverse, utilizing their slip space drives to reduce the mass of each of their CCS battlecruisers by 50%. As the Star Destroyers follow, the Covenant is going to make sure it's fighting on its own terms. The commander of the Star Destroyer fleet orders each Star Destroyer to perform a tactical faster-than-light jump to enter within weapons range. Within an instant, the Star Destroyers blink close enough to the Covenant vessels to open fire with a barrage of turbolasers and ion blasts to take down the shields. All 360 TIE fighters are scrambled and stick close to their home ships until the Star Destroyers are in range to lead a suicidal charge. As the TIE fighters engage the Covenant fighters, the TIE bombers and interceptors make short work of the Banshees, but struggle against the shielded Seraph fighters. The swift TIE fighters make short work of the Banshees, leaving the Seraphs to themselves, and the CCS battlecruiser's point defense systems still manage to harass a majority of the TIE fighters with its pulse laser defenses. The TIE fighters realize this, and they quickly decide to pull back. A large chunk of both of the force's fighters have been lost. Plasma bolts have damaged many of the TIE fighters, whilst many of the Seraphs just pull back and refresh their shields. In a stunning move, the CCS cruiser makes a slip space jump directly behind the line of Star Destroyers, directly facing the Star Destroyers aft. Even if the Star Destroyers could redirect their shields to the aft in time, the plasma lance would quickly break through and bisect the Star Destroyer into two. Miraculously, the Covenant took 0 losses, and the Empire took 5. So here's 2 things to know here. One being that slip space, while in the grand scheme of things, it's slower than faster than light travel on the galactic scale, it still has far more tactical advantages. So you see, slip space is an extra-dimensional space lacking any space-time at all, which means a ship can enter slip space, phase through an object, and emerge somewhere else, even facing another direction. So this means that the Covenant can emerge anywhere from slip space, even inside of an enemy's shields, like when the Prometheans boarded the UNSC Infinity in Halo 4. Star Wars hyperspace, in contrast, has to account for mass lying in between each point, hence why the hyperspace highways are the only routes considered safe, because there's no major bodies that lie between them. So, another example would be a Star Destroyer is wanting to turn around completely. Instead of having to physically turn the ship to 180 itself, it can enter slip space in one direction and come out of slip space in another. Secondly, the Star Wars power scales for turbolasers and shields do not match what is ever shown in Star Wars media. Supposedly, a Star Destroyer turbolaser is equivalent to, I believe it was 200 gigatons per shot, or 4,000 Tsar bombas. However, the power shown in multiple films is drastically below what is told. And also, side note, that lore was written in the 80s. I'll get to that later, but that lore is very, very old. It's not up to date. So while the Star Destroyer certainly would chew into the hull of any Covenant battlecruiser, if the Covenant can't put them down first, without a slip space drive, the Empire will struggle to combat the Covenant. So the Covenant fleet would scavenge the vessels and take home whatever information they could. Though small, the Covenant fleet of 5,000 odd ships total still outnumbered the Rebel Alliance with their total of 1,750 capital ships at their height of their power, meaning the Covenant would have more military capabilities than the rebellion. The Empire would now become aware of another force in the outer regions of the galaxy with a navy comprised of capital ships, which are on par, if not superior, in my opinion, to Star Destroyers. With the continued cleansing of the Outer Rim, the Covenant presence will become known to the galaxy abroad. This is the only force, other than the Rebellion, which had been causing consistent blows against the Empire. The Covenant would push their religious agenda abroad to any species willing to join, to eradicate humanity and partake in the Great Journey. Seeing the trauma from thousands of years of war, from the Old Republic to the Clone Wars to now the Galactic Civil War, the Covenant might easily gain sympathy from many anti-human aliens which seek to remove humanity from power. The Great Journey would now take a foothold in the galaxy because of this. The Galactic Empire, which would now be dedicating more of its naval resources to stamp out the Covenant, would find it difficult to respond. The Covenant would realize the Star Wars Empire has zero slipspace technology because their sensors can detect any slipspace ruptures from a vast distance. Without their traditional numerical advantages they use in the Human Covenant War, the Covenant would bide their time and use hit-and-run tactics. Also, since the Imperial worlds held no Forerunner artifacts, the Covenant would rarely conduct ground invasions, and they would immediately skip to glassing any planets they came across, which would drastically increase their invasion speed of the galaxy. So again, while the Covenant slipspace is generally slower than hyperspace, the Covenant can still teleport to any star system at will, albeit at a slower pace, but they don't have to worry about what's in between point A and B, and they can go in any 3D direction. So, also, the Empire is restricted to highways, and they have many planets that they need to defend, which in the movies meant that even the rebels could restrict the Empire's effective fleets to be small enough that the rebels could match them. The Covenant, however, have a homeworld that can teleport anywhere, including places in the galaxy that no hyperspace travel can reach without self-destruction. And they can colonize worlds to build its numbers and fleets in places that are inaccessible to the Empire. Meanwhile, the Empire has got to station cruisers at every single planet to be able to respond to any attack because unlike other hyperspace ships, they can't just make blockades to stop the Covenant travel. And to make matters worse, when a Covenant ship is destroyed, its coursing liquid plasma melts the ship's systems and effectively self-destructs everything, including the slipspace drive. Not only this, but much of the Covenant technology was intentionally designed to be near impossible to reverse engineer, which really caused a headache to the UNSC during the Human Covenant War. So Star Wars technology has largely also been stagnant for thousands of years, meaning the Empire's only chance of obtaining slipspace technology is reverse engineering the slipspace drives to go through the Forerunner portal and raid Covenant worlds for their tech. Subterfuge in the Covenant cult would also be pretty difficult, seeing as in 30 years of the Human Covenant War, not a single defector left the Covenant for the UNSC. Eventually, the Empire would locate the Forerunner portal and discover the Milky Way galaxy. You see, the galaxy would be uncharted, and space is very, 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 very big. So you can remember, the Empire would be very slow to explore the Milky Way galaxy. They don't have the hyperlanes like they do in the Star Wars galaxy, so any of the Forerunner installations would also be a heavily guarded secret by the Covenant. Within the Star Wars galaxy, the Covenant would be slowly building sleeper cells within alien communities in the Outer Rim, and they would be gaining rising support from xenophobic aliens. Much of the alien support that was originally sided with the Rebellion would instead choose the Covenant for multiple reasons. The first being that the Covenant's message of hatred towards humanity would resonate with alien populations more than the Rebellion offering a new human-led government. Only this time, they're reforming a democracy, which failed the galaxy already in the Republic. If I were a Wookiee, or, I don't know, something, enslaved by the Empire, being forced into a labor camp by predominantly a human empire, of course I'd rather choose the religious alien-centric cult that's promising me salvation. They've got a standing army, And, more importantly, they've got free healthcare. So I, as a Wookiee, would probably be more inclined to not choose the same old good-intentioned, human-led democracy that has failed to keep the galaxy stable since the Old Republic. So anyways, many of the Covenant terrorist attacks would take place across the galaxy in the name of the Great Journey. High Charity and her fleet would likely stay inside of the Milky Way while the Empire fumbles around blindly within the galaxy. In contrast, the Covenant would be able to gain access to many galaxy charts of the Star Wars galaxy and plan from there. The Intel War initially would heavily favor the Covenant as the Empire struggles to meaningfully respond. Darth Vader would also be used as an enforcer when destroying Covenant worlds if they were found, or when they were found, that were found in either the Star Wars galaxy, who had been colonized, or in the Milky Way galaxy. Many of these raids on found Covenant colonies or worlds would include Lord Vader, and it would be absolutely horrifying. None would be spared, and rumors would spread around the Covenant of a demon using dark magic. Lord Vader would be seen razing Covenant factories hidden away from the hyperlanes, stopping plasma bolts mid-air with his hand, and throwing them back in the face of the poor grunt that had opened fire upon him. His lightsaber would cut down elite ultras with 2 swings, one for the shield, the second for the head. Packs of elites wielding energy swords would be no match for him, with entire groups being choked to death if their necks weren't snapped first. Hunters would be pulled apart, revealing their colony of worms that would be inside before being crushed underneath Vader's boot. The Covenant knew Darth Vader as an omen of death, and then feared him, and the prophets ordered his death to be a highest priority. While currently, at this time of the war, much of the Covenant's home turf has been undiscovered by the Galactic Empire, the Covenant shipyards would be in total mobilization to combat the Galactic Empire. Eventually, through intel gathered, the Covenant would learn of the Galactic Empire's true size and massive fleet. While the rebellion raged on in the Star Wars galaxy, the Covenant could never, ever establish relations with an organization including humans. Over the years, the Covenant guerrilla war would rage on. The Empire would secure the entrance and exits of the Forerunner portal, effectively separating both galaxies from each other. In a long and grueling search, ironically similar to how the Covenant were searching for Earth, the Galactic Empire would slog through a slow campaign of conquesting Covenant territory in the Milky Way galaxy. The Covenant worlds would be hard to find, like a needle in a haystack, and without any navigation data, the Empire was searching blindly. On the ground, the battles would be horrific. The Covenant outmatched the Imperial Army in almost every way, but through sheer numbers and force, the Empire would take over the Covenant's homeworlds and destroy the Covenant's industry. Many troopers who were occupying the Covenant homeworlds had personal vendettas against the Covenant. The reach of the Covenant terrorism affected a vast majority of humans in the galaxy at this point. Aliens would be frequently slaughtered and enslaved. Many troopers would take pot shots at any passerby aliens, and the general populations would be treated horribly by the Empire, as if they weren't already. With the rising tide of anti-human sentiments being formed throughout the galaxy, Emperor Palpatine's support would drastically increase among the human-populated Galactic Empire, and the anti-alien policies within the Empire would be expanded upon. Needless to say, this would tick a lot of species off and drive them further within either the rebellions or the Covenant's corner. Terrorist attacks initiated by the Covenant would become so rampant that the human politicians within Coruscant would constantly be heavily guarded by the Coruscant Guard, and bombings within political and military sites would now become commonplace. The Emperor would, at this point, already have multiple assassination attempts upon him, and the Covenant, which had already outlawed the Covenant religion, which has already been outlawed within the Empire, would gain fanatical support every day. You see, this flame of hatred towards humanity would likely overshadow the rebellion, which would lead to the Covenant gaining ever more support. Emperor Palpatine by now knew full well of the Covenant's religious views on humanity and would take advantage of the chaos by positioning himself as the savior of mankind and as a figure of order and justice. Imperial plans will be put into place to locate the Covenant capital of High Charity and decapitate their leadership. With the combined support of the Imperial Intelligence Agency and the Imperial Security Bureau, the Empire would lead a wild goose chase to assassinate the prophets. High Charity had proven elusive to the Empire during the entire conflict. Much like the UNSC, Covenant ships were ordered to purge any and all navigation data upon coming into contact with any Imperial forces, and were ordered to self-destruct if boarded. Covenant ships, if retreating, would be ordered to make multiple random slipspace jumps before returning to their colony. Eventually, whether it be a probe or a random hint, a probe would be attached to one of the Covenant ships within the Milky Way in order to track where High Charity was. The Prophet of Regret would be located upon a Forerunner world, excavating for Forerunner artifacts. Operation Glup Shudo would go into full effect, which would plan for a squadron of storm commandos to infiltrate the High Charity and plant a proton bomb on the city's power source, so that the Imperial Navy could intercept and capture High Charity, and for another squadron of storm commandos to go planetside to an adjacent system to take the Prophet of Regret hostage. The operation would take effect in the dead of night. 2 squadrons of TIE Phantoms would jump a great distance away from the objective, and at a speed of 1,490 kilometers an hour, the TIE Phantoms would cloak and approach the objectives. While there have been rumors during the Covenant War with the humans that Oni had infiltrated High Charity once, the rumors were unconfirmed. The first squad of commandos would land upon the planet in the midst of a thick jungle. Covenant forces were sighted 1 kilometer from the landing zone. The operation on High Charity was only to take place after the Prophet had been secured, just in case High Charity's stealth detection was up to snub. Stealth drones were at the ready to enter the estimated defense radius of High Charity to test the waters. The Storm Commandos would set up a kill box around the Prophet's excavation site. 1 commando sat in the tree line, ready to provide covering fire should things go sideways. 2 Storm Commandos leading the charge crawled up behind a pair of elite honor guards, before quickly assassinating the elites. The one on the left had his neck twisted violently, before the snapping of a spinal cord was heard, and the one on the right was stabbed through the throat, forcing purple blood to gush out. The bodies were dragged into the bushes, and hand signs were made by the commander to clear the building up ahead. As multiple commandos made their way upwards, they planted remote explosives and smoke screens along the way. They silently dispatched any unfortunate Covenant soldiers that got in their way. The Storm Commandos eventually reached the first building in the facility. Beyond the cold metallic purple door, a sermon was heard being preached by the Prophet of Regret. The Storm Commandos smelled blood in the air now. With a distinct alien hum, the door lights turned green and slid open. A brute multiple times the size of a Storm Commando confidently strutted out of the doorway. 1 commando would enter before the door closed on the left, and the commando on the right would violently dispatch the brute using a chokehold on the head before shoving a silenced blaster into the temple of the brute's head and pulling the trigger. The door shortly closed, but opened once again with the Storm Commandos standing behind. Over the next hour, the commandos would travel perch to perch, carefully planning the next moves and enacting them with perfection. At last, through an ornate hallway of silver and blue, the Prophet of Regret sat suspended in mid-air by his hover chair. The architecture was unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. It was not of Covenant origin. Thick metallic struts with angular designs culminated in an almost mechanical but artistically made design. The Storm Commandos took a mental note, but carried on with the operation. With the position set and weapons ready, the Storm Commandos violently executed the entire room's honor guards instantly. A few survived the seemingly fatal shots and charged the assailants with staffs in hand. In studying acrobatic skill, the Storm Commandos rivaled the honor guards in melee combat. But the elite's pure size and power combined with years of training outperformed some of the Storm Commandos. With a violent plunge of a knife, 1 commando stabbed an honor guard. 3 commandos were alive at the end of the encounter. 1 was wounded. The Empire's orders were very clear. The Prophet must be taken alive, at any cost. The 2 commandos made the horrible decision to leave their wounded comrade behind, to ensure that the mission was completed. The Prophet of Regret shot beams from his hover chair towards the 2 commandos. who quickly closed the distance and overloaded his chair's electronics with a restraining bolt-looking device. The Prophet was taken into custody. Outside the facility, alarms blared and troops scrambled. The cover sniper watched the door in anticipation of his comrades. 2 commandos stood with the Prophet of Regret slung over one of their bodies. A blast of explosions lit up parallel to the commandos on both sides, which lit up the sky of the nighttime jungle. The tremendous flames of the explosions had even caught the jungle ablaze. The cover sniper outside began taking shots at any responding Covenant forces with lethal accuracy. A line of Jackal snipers took a position on the building's ridge, but with shot after shot, each of their heads would explode. As the 2 commandos reached the jungle, the cover sniper stayed put to cover the rear. Multiple Phantoms and Banshees quickly stormed the area, which even the commando sniper could not contend with. He slid down the side of the sniper's nest and took cover. 4 Golden Hunters would drop out of the back of the Phantom with a violent thud on the ground, and with reckless abandonment, charged their beam cannons towards the sniper. A flurry of green covered the radius all around him, throwing him backwards tens of feet, violently into a tree. The sniper tried to crawl, but to no avail. He could not move. Paralyzed from the neck down, the sniper sat. With the risk of capture likely, he activated his electro capsule, and he great journeyed himself. The 2 commandos sprinted through the violent blaze in the jungle carrying the hierarch, and as they ran through, the snarls of skirmishers slowly became louder and louder. Not a single shot was fired towards them out of fear of killing the Prophet of Regret. Knowing they could both not outrun the creatures, one of them turned around and opened fire. The skirmishers in front were instantly killed, but the ones behind took an unorthodox route through the trees and evaded the rapid blaster fire. As he emptied his magazine, the leading skirmisher sprinted past him. The instant he turned his head, the skirmisher violently tackled the commando to the ground before clawing at his armor. With a thermal detonator in hand, the commando took a number of jackals to hell with him in a violent explosion. The last commando, mere feet away from his escape, heard a skirmisher behind him. He turned around, Prophet in his left arm and blaster in his right hand. He pointed it towards the Prophet's head. The skirmisher stopped, and he snarled. Soon a crowd gathered, forcing the commando to have his back against his TIE Phantom. Within the next minute, the commando knew he would be dead. As more Covenant troops caught up, the Prophet whimpered, demanding help. The commando noticed 4 jackals climbing to the top of the tree line, with their needle rifles stowed on their backs. They took their positions and activated their purple head targeting headgear. Before the jackal could even raise their weapons to kill the commando, he let out a single deafening shot through the Prophet's head before turning it on himself. Before the second shot was fired upon himself, multiple needles shot through his arm, immobilizing him. Before he could activate his electro capsule, the skirmishers forced his helmet off violently and broke his jaw to remain open. The fate of this commando to the Imperial Intelligence Agency is unknown, but his demise was sure to be slow and agonizing under Covenant torture. Meanwhile, in a not-so-surprising turn of events, the TIE Phantoms, which had been sent to infiltrate High Charity, were easily detected by the city's stealth detection abilities. The drones which were sent in were immediately destroyed, and a patrol of Seraphs came towards the TIE Phantoms. The squadron retreated. While this entire thing wasn't a complete failure, the infiltration of High Charity would be impossible in the future, and the Prophet, which was meant to be taken hostage, was now dead. So the Empire lost a valuable bargaining chip with the Prophet of Regret as a hostage. Any species that would join the Covenant in the future would share hyperspace technology with the Covenant, but they would never be allowed to utilize slip space or even be on board of a Covenant vessel. Slip space technology would be another closely guarded secret which only the original species from the Milky Way galaxy would have access to. Covenant raids would frequently slip space by Star Destroyers and start broadsiding them before they even launched boarding craft into their vessels. So the boarding craft would board, and the Covenant ground forces, being far superior to the Empire's, would just slaughter the onboard troopers. Elites with active camouflage would slay stormtroopers by the dozen before quickly disappearing, or hunters would just bulldoze through any defensive lines that the Empire had put up, and the brutes would probably kill as many troops as they could get, obviously, before eating them, I suppose. And, raiding planets, scarabs would fall down from the sky and burn through any Imperial defenses, and Imperial vehicles, which were mostly unshielded, would be utterly destroyed. Near the carcasses of a downed AT-AT, Imperial troopers would take cover behind, setting up an E-Web machine gun to fire down upon the encroaching Covenant lines. Again, scarabs would fall down from the sky and stab their massive legs into the AT-AT's corpses before a greenish-blue beam would eviscerate the troopers below. One of the most impactful battles that would occur would go as far into the core worlds as Kuat. The Covenant would take paths far away from the hyperlanes to attack at unexpected angles, and one planet which certainly would be sieged was the Kuat drive yards. You see, the drive yards are an industrial powerhouse for the Empire, and they supplied many other Star Destroyers. With a CSO carrier and an escort of multiple battleships, the fleet would encounter another fleet of multiple Star Destroyers, including 2 interdictors and a super Star Destroyer. The Covenant would once again start off by using their weapons range as an advantage, and the Star Destroyers would once again have to limp helplessly towards the Covenant. So, while Star Destroyers have never really used tactical faster than light often, I'm just going to throw the Empire a bone here and say that the fleet commander utilizes this tactic and quickly closes the range to the Covenant. An immediate broadside would take effect once again with the CSO carrier and Super Star Destroyer exchanging blows. So turbo lasers, despite their name, are in fact not lasers. They're ionized gases, i.e. plasma. So the Covenant and the Empire are in fact using the same weapon. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I said we'd talk about turbo lasers again. There is an old expanded universe number that has the turbo laser yield in the gigatons, which is an insane number that would disintegrate the Covenant ships entirely within a couple of shots. Not only is this not really fun for this scenario, but this number was from the 80s, and the author who put this number down said he just mathed it out from other sources. So I'm not going to accept this number as factual. I'm sorry. I love Star Wars. I'm trying not to be biased here, but that's no, I'm not accepting that number. Anyways, Covenant shields would be able to stop turbo laser fire, but on the other hand, Covenant shields are susceptible to plasma, supposedly. So turbo lasers would, again, supposedly eat right through Covenant shields. I believe, though, that the Covenant would have a better grasp on plasma-based weapons and shields, and the Covenant can change, as an example, the direction of their plasma in mid-flight. This just shows how complex their knowledges are on electromagnetic forces. Think about the plasma launcher in Halo Reach. Anyways, they also make personal shield emitters and power units to very small sizes, which, in contrast to the Star Wars personal shield emitters, they don't emit radiation, and they're typically not so dang large that they have to be mounted on the back of a giant camel like in the Phantom Menace. So, comparing and contrasting the Empire to the Covenant's shields, I think it stands to reason that the Covenant shields would still be very powerful. I believe more powerful than the Empire's, but I'm just going to say that they're roughly the same. The only thing that's ever destroyed a CCS cruiser in one hit was an SMAC orbital gun, and a single round from that orbital gun has more energy than all of the nuclear weapons in the world combined at a unit of measurement I've never heard of, 21.6 zettajoules. Still, though, the shields on the CSO would still waver. Boarding craft would be launched during the broadside to board the Super Star Destroyer with the intent of planting a bomb inside like Halo 2. This really wouldn't be easy, though, considering the Super Star Destroyers carry an army of 40,000 troopers and 250,000 crew in comparison to the CSO's 36,000 soldiers and 51,780 crew. Also, the Star Destroyer, which is 19 kilometers long, are actually the Empire's primary capital ship killer within the Empire. Meanwhile, the CSO, which clocks in at a still very impressive 29 kilometers long, was designed for space combat and planetary bombardment. The Executor, presumably, outnumbered the CSO in its turbolaser count, but we don't have exact numbers for the CSO's weapon count, so this is only speculation. I believe the CSO has less firepower, but I take back what I said earlier. I do think it does have more powerful shields. I take that back. It has more powerful shields. In Halo Fleet battles, that's even mentioned that the same kind of orbital gun, which one-shotted the CCS cruiser, was unable to even dent the CSO carrier. Again, that was the SMAC orbital gun. It could not dent the CSO carrier. This would be a really close battle anyways. I'd say it'd probably be 50-50. But it really would depend on the strategy of both fleet admirals. The Covenant's goals here are either to plant a bomb from inside the Super Star Destroyer or to destroy the very open and very exposed bridge and shield and generators on top of the vessel while creating distance between the CSO and the Super Star Destroyer. So the Super Star Destroyer would be more nimble than the CSO, but the CSO has more mass to absorb plasma once her shields go down. And plasma loses penetration beyond the surface, so the CSO might be able to slug through an onslaught. You know, the Empire's goal here still is to either keep the Super Star Destroyer's shields up at all costs and overrun the Covenant, whether that be with reinforcements arriving or the garrison able to push through. But still, Seraph fighters sent by the CSO with personal shields would still be able to take out a good 3-to-1 ratio, I'd say, of the TIE fighters, which definitely outnumber the Covenant's fighters. Seeing as TIE fighters are notoriously fragile, again, but nimble, the Seraphs would probably still struggle against the Empire's pure numbers. TIE fighters would be scrambled from the Star Destroyers and the Quad Drive Yards too, darkening the skies with their numbers. They would fly together in a curtain formation with their wings nearly touching each other and confront the Covenant fleet head-on. The CSO would slip space once again diagonally down behind the Super Star Destroyer pointing up and open fire. The fleet of the supporting Star Destroyers would turn sideways in an attempt to defend the Super Star Destroyer's rear. Meanwhile, on board the Super Star Destroyer, the boarding parties had made some progress, seeing as the Covenant ground military heavily outmatched the Empire's. The Covenant would be taking a good ratio of kills to casualties against the Empire, but even still, the progress on board was going slow to reach a plausible position to detonate the bomb. The CSO carrier would also lose her shields before the Super Star Destroyer, and would be taking heavy fire from the Super Star Destroyer's extreme firepower, which would be aimed at the CSO's center point, where the least amount of mass was concentrated. Soon, though, the Super Star Destroyer's shield generator would be destroyed by bombing Seraphs, rendering the Executor vulnerable. Using the last of her available energy, the CSO would once again make a tactical subspace jump once this Super Star Destroyer had fully turned to its aft again. Realizing what was about to occur, the Imperial Admiral would attempt to make an emergency jump to hyperspace to save the vessel, but sadly the engines were shot dead and the Executor would sit immobile with its back turned once again. Through minutes of fire, the CSO excavation beam would eviscerate the rear side of the Super Star Destroyer, effectively winning the battle. And then, beyond the smoke and ruins of destruction, a lone Seraph pilot will crash directly into the bridge of the Super Star Destroyer, causing the vessel to nosedive into the planet below.
Intensify forward firepower!
After the battle, the Covenant would now launch a devastating ground invasion before the Imperial reinforcements could arrive. The Covenant raiding fleet would need to cause as much damage as possible before leaving. Some alien informants at the Quad Drive Yards informed the Covenant of locations of high-ranking officials across the planet, and so Phantoms would descend into the atmosphere and hunt them down. The Imperial Army would mount a defense with the background of the sky turning red from the Covenant's glassing beams. Spirits would descend and deploy the Covenant ground forces. A flurry of plasma would shoot through the air, melting through troopers' armors and pouring into the poor soldiers' flesh below. The air would be filled with chaos as troopers run in a frenzy to their battle stations. One army trooper would be within a troop transport. The bay doors would open to a landscape of pure hell and destruction. With shaky breath, the trooper followed his comrades to the front line, when suddenly, like a ghost, a pure white ultra-elite phased into existence out of active camouflage. His energy sword plunged chest-deep into the trooper in front of him. The elite would throw the body down before charging this trooper, before being shot dead at 3 different angles by his comrades. The elite's shield would burst, and its lifeless body would tumble to the ground. Air transports were on their way, carrying AT-STs in tow to support the front line. Many would never reach their destination before they were swiftly destroyed by Banshee bombs. The Imperial Army stood hopeless against the Covenant's military might, from troopers being slammed in half by a hunter's shield to troopers being viciously mauled by sprinting packs of hungry jackals. The ground battle was lost, and as quickly as they came, they left. The battleships glassing from orbit stopped and sat silent. In a magnificent barrage of blue, the battleships would jump the slip space. When a reinforcing fleet of Star Destroyers arrived soon after, they were met with devastation. While many Imperial fleets came under attack by the Covenant, none, not even the Interdictor-class Star Destroyers, would be able to restrain the Covenant ships from fleeing. You see, the Interdictor Star Destroyer was repurposed to stop any rebel ships from fleeing, but the way they achieved this was by using gravity wells to create an artificial mass shadow, which as a result appeared on ships' sensors and triggered a failsafe, preventing the ship from jumping to hyperspace. But for every Star Destroyer that would be sliced by the Covenant's battleships, 3 more would take its place. It's still effectively impossible for the Covenant to inflict meaningful losses for the Empire, forcing them to push for an ideological and religious victory. Eventually, though, the Empire would start uncovering the Halo installations and begin to study immediately. Palpatine did love his super weapons, after all. And on top of the discovery of the Halos, the UNSC Infinity and Grey Team from the UNSC would eventually come into contact with the Empire, initially confused. Grey Team, for those of you who don't know, was the last remaining humans from the UNSC who had been carrying out Operation Sunspear, which was a very unbalanced eye for an eye sort of thing. It was this retaliatory strike launched by Oni towards the end of the Human Covenant War. Grey Team had been avenging up until this point the fall of humanity by detonating Nova bombs across various Covenant worlds, leading to their destruction. The UNSC Infinity was a lifeboat vessel which was created for the purpose that if Earth fell, then what remained of humanity would be able to run far away as fast as they can, while being able to defend themselves from any Covenant patrols. So Grey Team and the UNSC Infinity would come in contact with the Empire, and they would be furious by the confirmation of Earth's destruction. The Infinity would already know, but Grey Team wouldn't. And, desperate for revenge, Grey Team and the UNSC Infinity would reveal all that they could of both the UNSC and Covenant technology, including the Infinity and Prowlers vessels for the Empire to reverse engineer. While the UNSC slipspace wasn't as precise as the Covenant's, soon the Empire would be able to obtain slipspace technology. The clock was now on for the Covenant to win the war before the Empire caught up to them technologically. Charts of human space and some parts of Covenant space will be given to the Empire, allowing them to meaningfully strike back. At this point in time, Grand Admiral Thrawn would be deployed against the Covenant to great effect. Over the last year, the Galactic Empire has gathered enough intel on the Covenant's battle tactics, and through the invasion of the Milky Way galaxy, they also learned a great deal about how the Covenant operated. Really, in summary, Thrawn would just be a great admiral against the Covenant. He would understand them, he would understand the warrior culture, know how to take advantage of their religion, know how to utilize foreign artifacts. Maybe, I don't know, he could hold them ransom against the Covenant, or he could just put them on his battleships so the Covenant wouldn't fire upon him. He would just destroy a great number of the Covenant's fleet and even some CSO cruisers with superior battle tactics and planning. And even worse yet, is that there are double agents within the Rebellion who would reveal that the Empire was nearly completing a super weapon never before seen by the Covenant. And this super weapon, known as the Death Star, too, can destroy planets. With most of the support from the Rebellion now siding with the Covenant, stopping this project's completion would mostly be in the Covenant's capacity. So now the Prophets are really backed into a corner. they're not in the position to fire the Halo arrays now because they've got a very angry, non-negotiating Galactic Empire, which would still exist afterwards, and they can't let the Empire keep researching on the Halos because eventually the truth's going to get out, and the Prophets are going to be hung by their entrails. But they have no means to stop the Empire from being there either, since the Forerunner portal can't be closed. So ask yourself, what would an incredibly selfish and corrupt political oligarchy do when their own lies catch up to them? Well, they just destroy everyone's lives to protect themselves, of course. So here's one of the two scenarios I made following that idea. So fearing that the Empire might learn too much about the Halos and end up foiling the Prophets' plans of shaping a new galaxy, and with Covenant territory being conquered in the Milky Way, the Prophets are gonna devise a horrible plan to quickly get the ball rolling for humanity's extinction, and to force the Empire to return to their home turf. The Covenant would weaponize the Flood. This was the Covenant's original intention in Halo 1, but as many of you know, it ended horribly. While the events of Halo 1 never took place, the Covenant would have had enough time to at the very least learn of the Flood's existence. With a single Flood spore in stasis, a fleet of Covenant ships would plant the Flood infection in the core, some core world in secrecy, maybe Coruscant. The infection would rapidly spread, and within a couple of days, the Flood would spread off-world to neighboring planets. The Empire, with their hands full already, would likely neglect the first sign of a Flood infection. They have, after all, never encountered the Flood. But by the time the Empire realized how dangerous this parasite was, it would be far, far, far too late. The Empire at its very heart would face a monstrous cataclysm, with world after world being devoured by the parasite. The Empire was not nearly at the level of technology the Foreigners achieved, which means the Empire are not going to be able to slow the Flood down. Instead of thousands of years, like the Flood took during the Forerunner Flood War, the Flood would consume the galaxy within a couple of years, using hyperspace technology at that. Death Star would be blowing up infected planets left and right, but with the Death Star being populated itself as a planet, all it takes is a single Flood spore for that space station to be under Flood control. So without this video devolving into a Flood versus Empire video, the Empire would be too slow to react to the Flood's infestation, and without, plot armor or divine intervention, the Star Wars galaxy is doomed. With the Galactic Empire nearing its total collapse, the Prophets ensured that the Flood will wipe out all sentient life in the Star Wars galaxy, securing that they will be the only non-Flood players left in the Milky Way once the Halos are activated. So the Covenant forces would exit the Star Wars galaxy completely and leave many species behind for the Flood slaughter to come. So here we are, the Great Journey. The Prophets in their eternal wisdom have led the Covenant through generations of faith, and now the rings shall be activated. In secrecy, a single human and a group of backups were brought in tow to activate the Halos in secret. The Flood would quickly be consuming both galaxies and were reaching the Ark's control room. The Prophet knew that their entire plan to reach godhood had failed, and the only thing activating the Halos might achieve is buy the Sanshayum time to flee the galaxy, which will soon be overrun again by Flood entering through the portal between galaxies. With a deep breath, the Prophet of Truth's sweaty palm pushed a human prisoner's hand into the console. The Halos began their firing sequences. So here we are, the entire Covenant is staring up at the sky from the Ark, watching these pretty blue fireworks in the Milky Way galaxy set off. Sure, they're cool looking, but when is the Great Journey gonna kick in? Some minutes pass and the brutes are probably scratching their nuts and asking where their 72 virgin wives are, and within the hour, everyone starts freaking out and asking why aren't they in heaven yet? Were they left behind? The Prophet said devoting yourself to the Great Journey would ensure your participation in the Great Journey, but nothing happened. So Tartarus is standing near the Prophets, who are all sitting in silence, contemplating how utterly fucked they are if they don't do something fast. So the Prophet of Truth speaks.
Wait! I have an idea.
Really? What is it?
Let's leave!
But the door is locked, and the only way out is through the perfume department.
So the prophets try to reason that the galaxy has been laid bare for the Covenant to recolonize and that maybe. And the great journey was really just the friends we made along the way. Presumably, the majority of the Covenant isn't having that. And the prophets would make a break for a phantom, escorted by their most loyal champions, and fly off into the sunset. Not actually. In reality, the hordes of angry grunts are beating the prophets' skulls in. The prophets, in a sloppy attempt to save themselves from persecution, sacrifice the entire galaxy so that they may live. The San Shayum, who took shelter in the Shield World in the Milky Way galaxy, would attempt to flee with little success. Eventually, the flood would consume everyone, and both galaxies would be rendered inert. Nice job, Hierarchs. The second, perhaps more likely scenario is that the upper echelons of the Covenant have a meeting and discuss plans for assassinating the Emperor. Soon the Empire is going to learn to implement subspace tech into their fleet from Grey Team, rendering the Covenant's only tactical advantage mute. And should the Empire learn too much about the Halos, they could publish their findings to the galaxy and illegitimize the Covenant's entire religion. At the end of the day, the prophets need to protect themselves by ensuring the Covenant religion survives, or they will be put to death by the Covenant's population. Intel provided by agents within the rebellion suggests that Emperor Palpatine is at the unfinished Death Star 2 station, and the rebellion, despite having a weaker fleet than in the traditional timeline, will be launching an attack upon the station to destroy the station. That didn't make much sense, but I'm going to keep that in the script. If the Emperor is not killed within the next year, the Covenant will have no chance at victory against the Empire. The Hierarchs' hope are that the Empire will collapse and the Covenant will be able to divide and conquer. The Covenant would never help the humans in the rebellion, but the largest Covenant fleet ever amassed will be ready to carry on the battle at Death Star 2 should the rebels fail. The fleet waits in deep space nearby the forest moon of Endor, watching the events unfold. And then suddenly,
It's a trap!
to the Hierarchs, the Death Star 2 being operational would surprise them, and all would start to look lost for the rebellion. In a split-second decision, the Hierarchs would order the Covenant fleet to intervene. They would not open fire upon the rebel ships unless they were fired upon, or until the Death Star station was destroyed. Thousands of Covenant vessels would enter into the orbit of the Death Star and open fire. Boarding parties would not be sent unless the Covenant had easy access to the Death Star's core reactor. A massive three-way battle would unfold, and while the Imperial's 300 Star Destroyers and Super Star Destroyer would be heavily outnumbered, the Death Star was equipped with untold amounts of anti-capital ship turbolasers, which would easily make up for that. Darth Vader will proceed to kill the Emperor, and the Imperials who are already being crushed will scatter. The Death Star 2 will be destroyed, and the Covenant ships will immediately open fire upon the Rebel Alliance. With the Empire's interdictor Star Destroyers destroyed, the Rebels will flee. Over the following months, the Galactic Empire will collapse and pull out of the Milky Way galaxy so that those assets can be used by warlords who would consolidate territory. The Covenant are now in the strongest position yet. They are no longer under the threat of such a massive organized empire. The Covenant may withdraw to rebuild their shattered home territories before once again invading the Star Wars galaxy. When the time is right, the Covenant will launch a full-scale invasion of Coruscant to establish the Covenant hegemony as the dominant superpower, which will directly compete with the New Republic. As High Charity and her massive fleet jump into orbit, the citizens of Coruscant look up in fear. But what's this? A shooting star is flaming towards High Charity. But wait, that's no star. Thank you guys so much for watching. The end of the video was a bit rushed, but that's because it started to stray off the video's topic of the Empire versus the Covenant. Obviously, the Empire's sheer numbers would defeat the Covenant in a traditional war, but I really do believe that the Covenant have a chance to defeat the Galactic Empire, and it all hinges on recruiting new species to the religion. Should the Covenant fail to persuade other aliens to join the cause, then the Covenant really has no hope. So, man, yeah. I've been working on this video about 2 weeks. I work full-time. I've been writing the script at the end of my days, and man, editing it took a freaking while, but I just have little spurts of energy, and I like to put out videos like these. I am going to be making a review for Fallout the Frontier next, and I probably will do a Fallout the Enclave versus the Institute. So, without further ado, thanks again for watching, and this is St. Donald Binks, signing out.